Welcome. It's a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming out on a Tuesday night. I'm Mike Rosen, and it's my pleasure to be the Director of Pupil Personnel Services here in Yorktown. I'm going to go through a little bit of information, then we're going to introduce everybody. I'd just like to start out by introducing, we have Dr. Hatter here. Welcome, Dr. Hatter, and Superintendent and our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Deirdre Amerling. Thank you so much for coming. Just a couple of housekeeping. If you need to use the facilities, they're out the back door to the right, okay? And please, at any point during the presentation. What we're going to do is we will be going through in your packet. You have the PowerPoint. The questions will be up on the screen. That's on the right side of the packet. On the left, you have a survey, district information, some information from ASHA about speech and language, and then a page on the back, some things you can do for planning for your child's preschool meeting. So that's the packet. We're going to start. We're going to have everyone introduce themselves. Then I'm going to share just a little bit of information, and then we're going to go right to it. Just a statement on the survey. A lot of what we've done over the years has come from the survey. We've changed how we've had this night. We've been doing it for, I've lost track, 20 years. We used to have county representation come, but parents asked to hear more from the district staff, so here you are. And we don't have the county come anymore. A very important reminder a few years ago was we're here sitting on cafeteria benches. It'd be nice to have a break. So we will ask if you want to take a break about halfway through the questions. If you don't, we'll just keep going. If we want to take a quick break, we can certainly do that. There's some water up here if anyone would like it. And we'll start with introductions. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kathy Del Valzo. I am a general education kindergarten teacher in the ICT program at Mohansick.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Sanseverino, and I'm a Mohansick mom. My son goes to Mohansick Kindergarten.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Caroline Almeida, and I'm the Assistant Director of Pupil Personnel Services for the district. Nice to see all of you.
Hi, Liz Martin. I'm a special education teacher in the ICT program at Mohansick.
Kelly Rudick, Supervisor of Special Education here in Yorktown.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Travis. I'm a school psychologist at Brookside Elementary School.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Thomas. I'm a speech-language pathologist at Brookside Elementary School.
Hi, I'm Katie Wordsman, and I'm the social worker at Mohansick Elementary School.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Arno, physical therapist.
Hey, everyone. I'm Sabrina Rizzo, occupational therapist at Brookside.
Hi, I'm Kayla D'Agostino. I'm the behavior specialist at Brookside.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sabrina Casey, chairperson for the Committee on Preschool Special Education.
So before we start with the question, I just want to thank a few people. One, Caroline Almeida, Kelly Rudick, Sabrina Casey for helping really get this night together. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank Stefania Longabuco. She's the voice. You probably have had a lot of conversations with her about services and changes in services and finding service providers. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being here. She's a great contact, and obviously you guys all know how to find her. So we will be going down. The questions that we have really been questions that in the past parents have presented to us. So they tend to be the FAQs that parents want to hear. We know it's not the be-all, end-all, because you might have something else that you would like to have answered, and that's great. So what we'd like to do is go through them, let everyone answer the information, and then at the end we can come back and either get confirmation or more information on one of the questions, and you can go back to the person who answered, or we can have something that we didn't think about, and you can ask that question as well. Okay? We're going to start with the first question. And the first question is for Mrs. Casey, and the question is, how do I register my child for kindergarten?
Sure. So I know a lot of parents are very interested in that process. So you should receive an email about mid-February. It will come from the registrar's office. So I know a lot of you have worked with Val Bibaraj and Patty Sauber in the transportation office, so it will be generated by her. And in that email will be just some welcome information. There will be information on a kindergarten screening and how to sign up for that. And then it will also give you some more documents that you do have to complete. So look for that email. You're already half registered because you're here tonight. So look for that email around mid-February. And then to kind of go on to the second part of the question, I guess.
Do I have to register my child for kindergarten, even though they are already enrolled in the district for preschool special education?
So you will not need to provide the physical documents that you've already done, so the birth certificates that you've provided, the proof of residency, and the actual appointment where you had to come in to meet with Patty or Val. You won't have to do that step. In the email in February, there will be a preschool questionnaire, a parent questionnaire that they are going to ask you to complete, and that can be done via email, so you don't need to come in physically to register. There will also be a requirement for an updated physical. So if you registered your child over the past year, you'll have to provide an updated medical before they can come and complete that registration process. So that, again, will all be in the email. Those 3 pieces you will have to provide, but you will not have to come in person and redo any of the residency or birth certificate.
Thank you. The next question is from Mrs. Del Bazzo. Want to go to the next question? What is expected of children as they enter kindergarten, and what is expected by the end of the kindergarten year?
Well, most of you have been enrolled in preschool programs in the area. Your children have been exposed and follow an academic curriculum. If they know their letters and sounds, fantastic. If they don't, fantastic. We take the children from where they are and we move forward from there. Our expectations coming into kindergarten are really more about age-appropriate level of independence. So what does that look like coming into K in September? We talk about managing yourself, managing your materials, unpacking your backpack, unpacking your lunch, opening your snack, handling yourself, your clothing, your jacket, your pants, going to the bathroom by yourself. Toileting is independent and expected of all the children. Washing your hands, blowing your nose, all those self-help skills at an age-appropriate level. We do expect that the children can say and respond to their first and last name, that they can write their first name with support, but a lot of them are writing their name, to ask for help when needed, share and take turns, follow simple 2-step directions, and to sit and attend for age-appropriate read-alouds or instructions being given. That's really what the beginning of the year looks like.
And what does a typical day look like in kindergarten?
Our typical day at this point of the year, maybe not the beginning, but the children come in, they have morning bins and activities and social time. All of the classrooms transition to a morning meeting, calendar, a lot of language is happening there. Our ELA block then continues with phonics and phonemic awareness activities. We have a reading workshop, writing workshop. The children attend a daily special. Physical education, music or art is happening daily. They will all have small group differentiated instruction in both ELA activities and math. They have lunch and recess in the cafeteria. There's a math block in the afternoon, science and social studies, and SEL, which is social emotional learning, is happening. And then all of the classes have snack and choice time. And additionally, all of our K students visit the library and participate in ESTEAM activities weekly in conjunction with the classroom teachers and the kindergarten curriculum as a whole.
Thank you. So next up is Mrs. Sanseverino, and we're excited to have Ms. Sanseverino. Last year, she was sitting out there. So she'll share, her son is in kindergarten here with us this year, and it's great to have the perspective of a parent. Thank you so much.
Hi. My journey started with Michael a couple years ago. He is on the spectrum, and he has apraxia. So he is non-vocal. He uses a talker or an AAC device. My family was living down county, and the minute that I knew Michael would need special education, we came to Yorktown. Yorktown has very high standards. Yorktown has an amazing, amazing special ed department. Everybody up here, and if not dealing with them, I've dealt with whoever they supervise or work with. I have chills. I can't say enough of the love that I have for them. I'm a special education teacher of 19 years. If I wasn't tenure, I'd be begging for a job up here. The love that they have for our kids is unbelievable. It says a lot about the leadership and the higher ups in Yorktown to have such an amazing, happy family that will reach out and do whatever they need. Transitioning from preschool to kindergarten can be very nerve-wracking. It can be very scary. There's a lot of evaluations taking place. There's a lot of your child can't do's, a lot of things that hurt your heart. But these ladies and the gentlemen that Sabrina walks you through it and focuses on the wonderful things that they can do. And if your child needs a service, if they need it, if it's in the evaluation, you can be sure they're going to get it. I know you probably don't even remember, but Miss Almeida made sure that my Michael, at the end of preschool, his talker was due back, and she made sure that he did not go an hour without his voice. I was blown away, absolutely blown away by the kind-heartedness and the way that Yorktown deals with whatever you need. Just even the service providers, the way that they keep in contact with you. You have to trust the process, trust that they're here for you, trust that they know exactly what they're doing. They are well educated, they know what's going on. And if you have any questions, reach out, ask. If they don't know something, they will get you somebody that knows. Kayla was home this summer doing my son's FBA. I was blown away. I was blown away. Things that they don't even remember or know that they're even doing for us. It's just part of who they are. It says a lot about the schools, the community. I don't feel like my son is special ed. I don't know if that makes sense, but he is assimilated and incorporated into the classrooms. I was just talking, and her class sees him in the cafeteria eating lunch, and they play on the playground for recess. They go to gym together. They're included in all of the kindergarten trips and fun gingerbread making contests at school. It doesn't feel like we're separate. And that's how it should feel. We're all together. We're doing this all together. They make you, the people make you feel like you're assimilated into the community. It's a beautiful feeling up in Yorktown. I remember sitting out there, texting my husband, saying, we did good. We made the right choice. We did what we needed to do, and haven't looked back. And every day, these men and women just make me smile. And I text the teacher, and she tells me how he's doing, and I see the growth. It's amazing. Like I said, I'm a special ed teacher. When I come home, I don't want to know anything. So everybody at school is doing everything for Michael so beautifully. I don't know, there aren't enough thank yous for the pupil personnel, the therapists, everybody. They'll help you through anything that you need, even if it's just a phone call because you need to talk. That's been my wonderful experience here.
Thank you. And I know that what's happening is everyone's going to remember why they do the jobs that they do because of the results that we see. So thank you very much. That was great. Next up is Caroline Almeida. The question is, am I required to send my child to kindergarten next year?
Thank you. And thank you for that. It really does go by in a blink. You're sitting here right now, and you won't even believe how fast the year comes and goes. So that's why we start planning so early. And a lot of parents do have some trepidation about sending their child off to kindergarten. But as you heard, there's really no reason to be concerned, and most children are more than ready to start kindergarten, and we love to welcome them in, and we encourage you to send them to kindergarten. You all are here tonight because you have a son or a daughter, or more than one son or a daughter in some cases, who will be 5 years old on or before December 1st. So in New York State, you're not required to send your child to school until they become 6, which would be the year after. So every year we do get this question, am I required to send my son or daughter to kindergarten next year? And so the answer is no. Technically, you have one extra year where you could keep them out of kindergarten if you want to. And then they would start the following year in kindergarten. The thing that you have to know about that is that the county would not be providing any preschool special education services to your son or daughter if you do choose to keep them out an extra year. So you couldn't do the exact same thing that you're doing this year, for instance, because the county will do what's called an age out. They will say your child has aged out of services because they're school age technically, and so you can no longer continue to receive the services that you receive now through the county. So yes, you can keep them out, but no, they can't keep their service. So a lot to think about there. And we do encourage all of you to take your time and not make that decision right now. Because the reality is you could be sitting here right now saying, my son, my daughter would really benefit from an extra year before they started kindergarten. And you may feel that way right now, but we encourage you to keep your options open and go forward with the registration process and go forward and have a meeting for your child and see what services we would recommend, if any, for next year. This way you have the option of deciding whether or not to send them or whether or not to keep them home. In other words, you don't have to decide right now, and we encourage you not to decide right now. Look at all options and keep all options open.
Can my child continue to receive special education services if I keep him or her out an additional year?
Yeah, so that piggybacks on what I just said. You cannot receive services through the Committee on Preschool Special Education, in other words, through the county as you are right now. However, if your child is eligible for services in kindergarten and you choose to keep them out an extra year, they can receive some of those services. For instance, if your child is recommended for a special class program at Mohansick next year with speech-language therapy and occupational therapy, and you choose to keep your child out for an extra year, you could still bring them to Mohansick for their speech therapy and their occupational therapy. But I would caution you that it doesn't always work out the way you may envision it working out, because their speech therapy group might be on a Tuesday and a Thursday at 11:15, and their OT group might be on a Friday at 1 o'clock, and that might not work out with your schedule and with everything else that you have planned. So when you do bring them to school for their services, they're going to be at whatever time they would be if your child was a student in the school. And so it's not, there's not the flexibility for you to say, I want it at 8 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because it may or may not work out that way. They group them as they would if they were in school. So just a lot of things to think about. So yes, you can get some related services, but it's usually a little bit difficult because you have to drive them to and from, and it's at a schedule that may not work best for you or for them.
Thank you. Next up is Mrs. Casey. What does the transition process look like?
So the transition process for us here on the Yorktown side starts pretty early in the year. I know you've already received some surveys, some emails from us saying that we're already starting to talk about our incoming kindergartners. So we do meet with some elementary staff to set up some visits in case we can go to the preschool and see some of the students that are coming to kindergarten. We review previous testing to see if we want to do some updated testing, get some updated information. Some of your children, when they first were referred to us here, if they came from early intervention, some of the evaluations were still being done virtually. So those might be ones that we want to talk about redoing just to get some updated information. So the transition process for us does start early in the year. This way we can always prepare for our incoming class. No decisions, of course, are made outside of the committee when we're all together, but we do start just to prepare.
What can parents expect?
So in the coming months, the meetings will really start to happen, and the meetings can vary a little bit. So for some students that have made really nice progress with their services, we've seen nice progress towards their IEP goals. We'll come together as a committee, we'll discuss that at a meeting together, and if they're ready to be declassified from services, that can be done at an annual review meeting, and then they would join us in kindergarten as a general education student. For some students that might need a little bit of support come kindergarten, you might be invited to what's called a CPSE to CSE transition meeting. It's very similar, it's an annual review, but it's also a two-part meeting. So we would discuss preschool and preschool services, and again, progress towards their IEP goals. But at that time, if the committee feels they would require some services come kindergarten, we would convene as the Committee on Special Education at the same time. So it's a little bit of a two-part meeting to wrap up preschool and then discuss if they're eligible for services under the CSE. We'll discuss a little bit of eligibility criteria and what that looks like in a couple of minutes. But if they are eligible, the entire IEP would be developed at that meeting, so they're ready to come to kindergarten with that plan in place.
When will the meetings take place?
So you should start to receive some invitations. We are scheduling meetings starting in the beginning of February. They can run up until around the end of May, so you should get an invitation with enough advance notice. We did send out a survey to our parents to see if you opted for an in-person or a virtual meeting, so that was taken into consideration as well and will be indicated on the invitation. So again, you should receive some invitations coming soon. We're starting in about February.
How and when is eligibility for summer services determined?
So that would happen at the annual review meetings, whether you're having an annual review or that CPSE to CSE transition meeting. We'll discuss and go through, again, progress, and then we would talk about if they're eligible for services over what we call our ESY, or extended school year. To be eligible for those services, we're really looking at data to show if a student is demonstrating what we call substantial regression. When really what that means is, prior to a break or an absence, their preschool providers will collect data on their current levels and how they're doing. And then when they get back from a break or an absence, they would collect data to see if there's been a regression. And then if not only is there regression, but if they're being retaught those skills, they're also seeing how long does it take to regain the skills. And if it's within a typical amount of time, we do expect children to regress, with a break or over the summer. But if it's taking a substantial amount of time to regain those skills, then it could be a consideration for services over the summer. And all of the preschool providers have the county forms. They have the data forms that they do have to submit prior to the meeting, and it would be reviewed, and if so, recommended at their annual review meeting. Just one other thing, because I know a couple of parents did ask, and I wanted to mention it before. A lot of parents did ask if their preschool providers would continue with them when they come into kindergarten, and they would not. Like Ms. Almeida said, they're really aging out of kindergarten. So if they do require services, it would really be, here in Yorktown with our Yorktown staff.
Thank you. Next is Mrs. Martin. What are the different special education programs and class sizes at the kindergarten level, and what is the least restrictive environment?
So at the kindergarten level, there are 3 programs. You guys hear me okay? There are 3 programs that your child can be placed into according to their CSE, their annual review, and if your child needs an IEP. So the first is the integrated co-taught class. So that's students with IEPs are taught side by side with the general education population. That classroom has a general education teacher, a special education teacher, and 1 CTA, a certified teaching assistant in the room. They are working at the same pace as the general education population, same curriculum, and same pacing. The next program that we offer is the 12-1-2, which is made up of entirely students with IEPs, and that has 1 special education teacher and 2 teaching assistants in the classroom. Students within this classroom might benefit from a smaller class size. They might need more of a consistent environment to meet their needs. This class still utilizes the same curriculum. It's just prioritized, and it also gives the teacher the ability to teach at your child's pace, at a slower pace if they need, or at even a faster pace. The next class is the 8-1-2, which is made up again of entirely special education students, up to 8. They have 1 teacher and 2 teaching assistants. This classroom, students might have some more life skills that need more management skills and things like that, and it's a classroom that's alternatively assessed, so they're not accessing the same curriculum as the general education curriculum. One of the biggest things that we look at when we are making these decisions of what program your child would benefit from is the least restrictive environment, and that's LRE. So that's basically about maximizing your child's ability while also providing them the proper supports to help them be successful, to give them basically their wings that they can kind of achieve what they can on their own, but giving them those proper supports.
How much are special education students integrated with the general education, within the general education setting?
So all students are mainstreamed with lunch and recess in our building. They go to lunch together, they go to the recess outside, indoors together. They also can be mainstreamed for specials like art, music, library, physical education. And they can also, some special education students too, depending on your individual child, they can academically be mainstreamed. So if they're in the 12 or they're in the 8, there is opportunities for them to go into a 12 if they're in the 8, or an ICT if they're in the 12, because their academics, they can be pushed. And if it's math, that's their higher subject that they're really good at and they excel in, and they can access a faster pace and the curriculum. So we're always looking for those opportunities, and it's also something too that your child's special education teacher can also meet with you and the special ed committee to kind of decide that this is an appropriate step to take for them.
Thank you. Next up is Mrs. Rudick, and the questions are, how is it decided which of the 2 elementary schools each child attends?
Okay. Our goal is always to meet a child's needs in their home school if possible. So we always look toward that first. At times it may not be, we may not have an appropriate program to meet their needs or may not have available space. And in that case, then we may look toward the other elementary school for placement if we have an appropriate program to meet their needs. And in cases when we do not have an appropriate program at either elementary school, then we would search for a program to meet the students' needs.
Out of the district?
Out of district, that's the second part of that question.
Okay. What is the difference between the CSE and Section 504?
So Section 504 is if you have a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one of your major life functions, and because of that, you require accommodations through a Section 504 accommodation plan. The CSE is Committee on Special Education, and that is if you have a disability and you are eligible for special education services and you really require specially designed instruction and an individualized education program.
I just want to take a moment and thank you, Kelly. We have, with the support of Dr. Hatter and the Board of Education, we've really continued to grow our programs. So while right now we do have students who would be at Brookside going to Mohansick, Mohansick going to Brookside, it's coming less and less because we've started more programs in both buildings. And one of the great things about living here in Yorktown that we've seen over the years, when we need something, we have conversations on, is it the right thing to do for students? So we're having conversations this year. Do we need another class of an 8:1:2 ratio to meet the needs of the students coming into kindergarten? And as Mrs. Casey said, the process goes on early on. We start early in October, November, having conversations and looking at how many students are coming in, how many spaces do we have? Do we have enough classes to meet the needs? Do we need to create another classroom, and what does that look like? Where would it be? Do we need to knock down walls, build something, add a bathroom? Those are all conversations that happen all throughout the year as we plan, and it starts from the top all the way down to the person who's going to knock down those walls. Those are all part of the conversation. So a lot goes on based on the needs every year, and that's staffing, the needs of having a board-certified behavior analyst. Kayla was one we hired a number of years ago. Now we have 2. So all based on the needs of the students. And just keep that in mind, because that's a big focus of what we do every day. Next is Mrs. Travis.
Oh, I skipped there was one more question about
was there one?
transportation.
Was there another one?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll just touch on it. It's okay. You want me to?
How is transportation provided?
So, well, now I got a little thrown off.
I'm
It's okay.
sorry.
All students are provided with transportation in the district to their recommended school. But if a child requires special transportation, that would be a committee on special education decision or recommendation. And if a child requires special transportation, it may not be possible for their sibling to ride the same bus. It doesn't always work out that way due to size and capacity of the bus for that special transportation recommendation. But all students are provided with transportation, and if a student requires that special transportation piece, maybe due to medical or safety needs, things like that, that would be a recommendation, and that is listed on the Individualized Education Program, the IEP.
Now.
Almost skipped me there.
Now it's Mrs. Travis's turn. What are the classification categories and how is eligibility for special education determined?
So, as previously mentioned by Mrs. Casey, if your child is recommended to have a transition meeting, they're going to be recommended to the Committee on Special Education. So, in preschool, they were found eligible as a preschooler with a disability. Once they transition to school age, it's a little bit different. There are different classification categories, and there's 13 in total. As you can see on our screen there, we have them listed. There are some classification categories are really the most common. They would include other health impairment, autism, speech or language impaired. Those are typically the most common and upon entering kindergarten, but a child could qualify under any of those classification categories. When we're making a determination to whether or not your child who had a disability in preschool, whether or not they qualify as an incoming kindergartner with a disability, we look to see what the needs are as a committee. We review updated evaluations. We listen to the preschool providers. We look at the goals and how they were able to progress against their goals while in preschool. And it is made as a committee decision. If there are still needs that need to be addressed, then we develop an individualized educational plan there in the transition meeting, and we would find your child eligible under one of those 13 classification categories.
Thank you. That's about halfway through the questions. Are we good to keep going? Is everyone good? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the next question is for Mrs. Thomas. What is speech and language therapy, and how is it delivered at the kindergarten level?
Okay. Speech and language therapy is a related service, and it's put in place to target any needs in the area of communication that may have been identified for your child. There are many different areas in communication, and what we would look at, a child may have needs that we specifically need to target. For example, it could be in the area of articulation or speech sound development. Their speech may be hard to understand. They may have many sounds that they are mispronouncing currently, and that is something that may be addressed during speech and language therapy. It could also be language. In the area of language, we're looking at a child's ability to use expressive language, their verbal expression. Are they able to put together sentences? May even be grammar. Are they using like irregular past tense verbs, things like that? Are they beginning to develop in kindergarten? We are also looking at their ability to understand language, their receptive language ability. Can they follow two-step directions? Can they listen to a sentence and answer some WH questions about that sentence? Can they then listen to maybe a short story, maybe a paragraph in length, and answer questions about that? So those are things that we're beginning to look at. Also, vocabulary. Do they know basic concepts, things like in, on, under, next to, things that will come up academically in the classroom? We're really, working with students so that they can best meet their academic and social potential. They may have goals in the language of pragmatic language, which would target those social skills also. Are they able to stay on a particular topic in a conversation? Those are things that we work on in speech-language therapy.
So if I'm getting speech therapy, what would the classes look like that I'm placed in?
Students can be in any class within the school building and receive speech and language therapy. So they could be in any of the classes that Mrs. Martins discussed.
What will the timing be on a child being pulled from class for services? And is it random or from a specific lesson? Will the child need to make up what is missed?
It is absolutely not random. It looks like the NFL draft when the related service providers sit together and provide the best possible schedule for your student. we take everything into consideration, and the teachers also approve of the time that we're going to be pulling your student from the class. So most importantly, we have something on the schedule, it's called WIN, What I Need, and that is a time of day where no new instruction is taught in the classroom, and that is when we try to pull all kids for their related services. But what can happen is a student may have more than 5, and there's only one of those a day. So if your child has more than 5 related services in a week, they will have to be pulled beyond that WIN period. So then we're looking at what is the next best thing for your student to miss, and that is what the teacher will help us with. So the teacher will say, well, during this time we have some free time. This would be a great time for you to pull them. Or this is their, strongest area and something I could catch them up with quickly when they return to the classroom. So there's tons of input from everybody on the team when we make the schedule, and we really do what's best for your student. And obviously we're taking into consideration other students as well as we're doing that, but we really choose the best times. Your student doesn't necessarily need to make anything up, but a teacher may pull them aside to make something up with them. Like, they're not going to be sent home with work that they missed because they were in a related service, but the teacher may wind up pulling them aside later and maybe going over something that was completed when they weren't in the room.
Just something that's a little bit, thank you. One thing that's a little bit different that you'll see on the IEPs when your child comes into kindergarten, if school starts on September 6th, if you look further down, you'll see the related service date is usually about 2 weeks later. And it usually ends a little bit before the school year ends, and that's strategic as well, especially for the kindergartners, but for everyone. You come into school, you've got to get acclimated to your classroom, so it's not the first thing we start to take the kids for related services. And that NFL draft that Mrs. Thomas talked about, it takes some time. And we used to try to create the schedule in the spring prior to the school year starting or over the summer, but all it takes is a couple of students to move out, move in, get classified, and that schedule is in the circular file. So we really wait until everybody is in and they sit down and make the schedule, and that takes some time. So the schedule and also letting the students acclimate, especially in kindergarten. But it does go all the way through. We do start a little bit later so the school year gets started and the schedule can be made. Right? The next question is for Mrs. Wordsman. What is school-based counseling and how is it delivered at the kindergarten level?
Yeah, before I describe counseling, I want to say the vast majority of kindergartners will be able to get their social, emotional, and behavioral needs met in their kindergarten classroom. Our kindergarten teachers are absolute experts at helping children to identify and manage their emotions, make friends, learn how to share. For students for whom that's not enough, though, for those Tier 1 and 2 services that are happening in the classroom, perhaps with the aid of a behavioral specialist, there are counseling services available. They're sort of delivered in 3 ways. For students who have counseling as a related service on their IEP, it would be the same as with any other related service. They would have a weekly slot where they would come, and that we would have goals that we had set for them in the social emotional area. For students who don't have or don't require counseling as a related service on their IEP, but maybe need a little bit more, we also provide some time-limited building level counseling for kids who maybe just need a little extra work in particular areas around friendship making, around emotion management, that kind of thing. And then the third way that counseling is delivered is really more on a crisis basis, and a crisis could be anything from that kindergartner who's teary in the morning because they miss mom to somebody who's had a death in the family. So you might call me, the teacher might call me, I might see a child, coming in looking teary, and I might meet with them and just help them to feel better. But again, the vast majority of your students will get their social and emotional needs met in the classroom, but there are counseling services available to those who need a little bit more.
Thank you. How do children feel about being pulled out for services?
Generally, I find kids love to come for services. And sometimes when you go to pick up one student, the rest of the class, can I come too? Can I come too? There are some children, who are reluctant or have difficulty with transitions of any kind, even to an activity that they enjoy. So sometimes they just need a little extra help. That might be a warning from their teacher. Remember, in 3 minutes, you're going to be going to see Mrs. Wordsman for counseling, or you're going to be, going to speech or whatever. And again, the transition back to the classroom is sometimes difficult for some kids. They don't want to, leave your room and go back because that's been fun for them. So we have ways of helping kids with the transition back. But generally, particularly at the kindergarten level, kids like to come for their services.
Is there an orientation opportunity for children to tour the school prior to the first day?
Yes, there is a kindergarten orientation, so all of your children will be invited to kindergarten orientation, and that generally takes place the week before school officially starts. We have something that we call superintendent's conference days, and those are days in which staff and faculty in the district are working, but before students have come in, and that's historically been when we have the orientation for kindergartners. Beyond that, we don't really have private tours available unless there are extenuating circumstances. And being a nervous kindergartner or kindergarten parent is not an extenuating circumstance, because that would be the majority. But again, if there is some extenuating circumstance, you could certainly speak to the principal of the building about that. But all students will come for an orientation before the first day of school.
Thank you. Dr. Arno, what is physical therapy and how is it delivered at the kindergarten level?
So physical therapy in school is a little different than if any of you have gone to outpatient physical therapy, and it's even a little bit of early intervention physical therapy. There's a strict criteria, and the criteria is that I'm there, or the physical therapist is there to help the child access her education or his education. So for example, can they get up and down the stairs of the bus? Can they walk into the classroom? Can they go up the stairs if they're in Mohansick? Can they sit in a chair? Can they walk in the hallways independently without falling if they lose their balance, or you don't want them to trip and get injured? Can they access recess? Can they access gym? And these are all things that I look at, or like I said, the physical therapist would look at to make sure that they're safe in school. It ultimately is you want your child to be safe in school, and I want them to be happy and safe. So we look at, motor planning, balance, coordination, range of motion, and just trying to keep them safe in school.
Is there a prescription required in order to receive physical therapy at school?
Unfortunately, in New York State, we do need a prescription. And that's something that I'm going to ask everybody. If anybody's going to have PT next year, please get that before school starts so we can start. We want to get started and going, and for us to be wasting time is not a good thing. So if anyone, that's the one thing I'm going to ask, is that if we can have that ready for September, that would be really great, because it is New York State law, unfortunately.
All that's information, the prescriptions, if after the transition meeting, if services are recommended, the prescriptions would come from the PPS office. So then just the quicker you get it back to us, it will be ready to go when we have those services start in mid-September. Next we have Mrs. Rizzo, occupational therapy. What is occupational therapy and how is it delivered at the kindergarten level?
Okay, hi everyone, welcome. So in occupational therapy, we work on developmental milestones. We work on grasp patterns. We work on fine motor, if the child can hold a pencil properly, can they hold utensils properly, can they hold the scissors. So we work on the developmental processes of fine motor. We also work on visual motor. Can they color within the lines so they understand how to color? Do they know their spatial orientation to remain inside lines, or are they going outside of the lines? We work on scissor skills. Can they hold the paper properly? Can they hold scissors properly? So we work on a lot of coordination from eye-hand coordination points of view. We work on a lot of internal organization. Can they follow directions? We also work on can they follow multiple steps directions, like with motor planning and exercises. We do a lot of smartboard activities where they're following directions. So we cover a lot of developmental milestones to get them ready to access their curriculum within the classroom.
What sensory and nervous system supports already exist in the classroom?
So for sensory regulation, we want to make sure that they can attend to the activity, they can follow directions, they're regulated. So within the classroom setting, we offer various tools that we use. We use adaptive seating, we use sensory fidgets, we use consultations to support teachers for sensory strategies within the classroom setting.
Is there a sensory room?
Within the OT rooms, we do have sensory equipment that children can come, they receive sensory input. If a child needs regulation, they come to the sensory room. We have sensory swings, sensory balls, mats, various equipment that we use for sensory regulation.
Thank you. Mrs. D'Agostino? What supports are in place at the kindergarten level to help with behavioral challenges?
Hi, so there are sort of like 3 different levels. We follow the PBIS model, which is Positive Behavior Intervention Support Systems. So you sort of have the Tier 1 model, which is in every classroom and every child has access to it. So it's really just generally positive reinforcement, behavior charts for the whole classroom, classroom management systems. Then we have sort of Tier 2, which is supporting students who are a little bit more at risk for a little bit more severe behavior problems, but we want to get to it prior to it becoming more of an issue. So, giving more attention to that student, to having a reinforcement system in place, increased opportunity for that reinforcement, more individualized behavior services or individualized counseling. And then the Tier 3 is sort of for the kiddos that we need a little bit extra support, and that's when we would develop a functional behavior assessment and a behavior intervention plan, which is something that I myself do and the other BCBA in Mohansick does.
Great. I think I answered the question as far as is a behavior specialist on staff, and I said we have 2. So one is at Mohansick and Crampon. One shares the 2 buildings right now, and Ms. D'Agostino is at Brookside. That's her one assignment. So what methodology and curricula are used in the 812 classrooms?
So in the 812 classrooms, it really follows an ABA model. So it's very individualized based on the student. And the way they get there to figure out what the student needs is by doing the ABLES assessment or the VB-MAP assessment, which really just figures out their language skills, where they are, the different ADL skills they have, what they need, so they can make that individualized curriculum for each child. And it does not follow the general education curriculum, which we mentioned earlier. It really is alternatively assessed.
Who's the student that's typically placed in that class?
So normally a student that is placed in the 812 classroom is a student who would not be able to access the general education curriculum. It wouldn't be best for them. It would be a student who truly requires that individualized learning experience, because in an 812 classroom, there's up to 8 kids, there's 1 teachers and CTAs, and if your child needs an aide, there's aides there too. So it's really that small classroom setting, kids that can't follow that general education curriculum and would benefit from an ABA-based curriculum.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Casey, what type of evaluations do you review?
So at the annual review meetings, all of your preschool providers see it, or if they're in a program, as well as any related service providers, will submit reports. And they're really talking about, again, progress towards their IEP goals, their data collection, and their progress monitoring. So all of that would be submitted. You should receive a copy prior to the meeting, and that would be part of their packet at their annual review meetings. We also talked a little bit about ordering new testing. So if we did recommend your child for testing, that would also be completed prior to the meeting and then discussed at the annual review meeting.
When will these evaluations take place?
So we sent out all the consent forms, so if you didn't receive one, testing was not recommended at this time. You could always double check with myself or Stefania to see, if you missed it or if you wanted just to double check. Once we receive the consent back, testing should start relatively quickly. It could be done through the CPSE, and if that's the case, we would just ask you to select a county agency, and they would complete the testing. Some of the evaluations are now being done through the Committee on Special Education. So if that's the case, it would be done either by a Yorktown staff, or sometimes we do work with BOCES to complete those evaluations as well. And the testing that we're requesting can vary. So for some students, we might want to do, a complete battery of assessments, from a psychological evaluation and educational. Or if there's just some speech and language concerns, we might just evaluate in areas of related service. So it can vary based on the individual child, but you should have received that, and if you've gotten it back to us, it should happen relatively soon.
And one of the things, as Mrs. Casey said, so you might be contacted by someone through the Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES to do a psychoeducational evaluation or a speech and language evaluation. I know that some of our own providers might be contacting, but they would be doing it after school. So they'll work a full day, and then they might have agreed to do a speech and language, a psychological. They might ask you to bring your child to the school that they work. It might not necessarily be your home school. It might be Mohansick versus Brookside, obviously. And someone from BOCES or one of our providers might say to meet at central office in the PPS conference room. So some testing is going on there. And they may surprisingly say to you, especially BOCES, can you bring your child on a Saturday? It's so hard to get the evaluations done that either myself or Mrs. Rudick or Mrs. Almeida, someone will be there, or to open a door to get the evaluation done on a Saturday, because we also have some providers that we like who can only do it on Saturday. So we've asked them to do it, and they said, if you can get me in on Saturday, I can knock, maybe test 2 or 3 students. So that might be an option as well. So don't be surprised if you hear that someone says, come on a Saturday. Next. So we're back to Mrs. Travis. If my child enters kindergarten as a general education student, but then begins to struggle academically or socially, what happens?
So I know it can be really scary when your child has had an IEP through preschool services, and then they're recommended for declassification. Be assured that coming into school as a kindergartner, we have a multitude of supports built into place to watch our students, both children who previously had an IEP and children who've never been identified with a disability before. Our preschool teachers, our kindergarten teachers are hyper aware of our kindergarten students as they come in, needs, expectations, and they communicate with the team fairly regularly about any concerns they may have or things that have popped up. We have a support system in place called the IST. It's our instructional support team. And if a teacher has concerns about how a child is progressing academically or socially, or really anything going on throughout the day, they'll bring up that child to that committee team, and we have a discussion about that child. We offer that teacher supports, recommendations on things that we can do as a building level, and if necessary, also then we may have the discussion about referring a child back. But it's really varying levels of support to try to identify where the needs are. So don't be fearful if your child does come in as a general education student. We're still aware of their needs, we're watching closely, and we meet as a team every week to discuss potential needs.
Can children repeat kindergarten the following year?
So yes, that is a possibility, but that decision is not taken lightly. It is a discussion that is, it happens starting about this time of year. If we have concerns about a child, it's not just the school making a decision though, it's really the whole team talking about the child, what their needs are, and really thinking what are the pros and cons of having a child be retained and repeat kindergarten, because it can affect them both academically, socially, behaviorally. So we want to make sure that we're making that decision based on the data and what the child's needs are.
Thank you. That's the list of questions. I'd like to start with, is there any additional information on any questions that we went through that you'd like more information on, or anything you want us to revisit? Those are about 15 questions. Is there anything that you'd like us to go back to? No? Okay, we'll come to, the new questions are coming. Okay. So the question is the placement between Mohansick and Brookside and having a sibling. So for the Committee on Special Education, we're really basing it on the student who has a plan. And I think part of the answer was it's possible siblings get split up. So if a child is recommended for Mohansick and your homeschool is Brookside, it is possible. And that's why we really worked hard as our numbers have increased to not have that need. So we have more and more programs. So there's some students have continued in the school because they were already there. But this is the first year, and Mrs. Sanseverino's son is in the class at Mohansick. The first year we've had an 812 classroom at Mohansick. So prior to this year, any student who needed an 812 classroom left Mohansick to go to Brookside. So I mentioned we might be looking at a need for another 812. So that's one, not two. So let's just say we open it at Brookside. It's possible we might have more students who have to leave the Mohansick catchment area to go over, and the siblings stay behind. A number of years ago, we had a parent, I think the triplets now are in middle school, maybe? I think so. We split up triplets, 2 and 1, based on the needs. And you go to a meeting, and there was dad on the floor with one, mom on the floor with the other two, and they still talk about it. It was like the greatest. They had no issues. It really worked out well. Any other questions based on what you've heard so far? So the question was about speech therapy, and can a student who's in a general education classroom receive speech? Absolutely. So we have students who might have an individual education plan if they have severe speech, but in the least restrictive environment that you heard about, that a general education classroom is appropriate. They would be placed in a general education classroom and be scheduled just like anyone else for speech therapy. We also, because of articulation needs, we've been, providing more services this past year for students who have no plan. So through more of a building level articulation services. So based on the needs, sometimes we have that, sometimes we don't, but it's more and more that we've had that service. And again, how we provide it is different. Right now we have a consultant speech therapist because of the numbers who goes, we have one at Brookside and a different one at Mohansick who see kids don't have a they may have a 504 but might not, and they don't have an IEP, but they get speech because ultimately the question that has to be asked is, does it impact learning? If it impacts learning, that's the main question. I'm gonna go over here. So the question was, if your child gets declassified, is it easy to get the services back? So a lot of conversation by people on the team like this, and then others make a very tough decision at the meeting about eligibility or not. So if the child is declassified, I think it was Mrs. Travis who talked about the data and all the supports that are looked at. So if a child is having difficulty, there's one of the things I talk about all the time is we have so many supports in the building that are not special education. So all those things would be put into place, whether it was building level speech, counseling, early literacy support, other types of reading and math support. And if all that isn't working, those are the types of things that come back to the committee and we would re-refer. Depending on when it is and when the evaluations were done and what the issue is, all or some of the evaluations might be done again. It depends. Might just be the educational evaluation, the psychological. If the child was average, probably will still be average, but we would focus on the area of need. I'm going to come to this side next. Who's over? Go ahead. So the question is, if you go to the committee and the recommendation is for an integrated co-taught class or a special class, and the parent is thinking more of a integrated co-taught classroom, and there's some difference of opinion. Anyone on the panel want to answer that one, or leave it to me? Go ahead.
The biggest thing is it's a committee decision. So we're looking at the different evaluations. We're looking at what preschool providers have said, preschool teachers have said, your input, how we're kind of interpreting the different evaluations. So it's a big committee decision. So it's not Placement's not taken lightly. It's a decision that we all want to make sure we're comfortable with, and we're going to set your child up for the success that they need. And we're going to, in most cases, we want to put them in the least restrictive environment, so where they can flourish on their own and where they can be successful.
We take it, as Ms. Martin said, very seriously. So we do err on the side of least restrictive, but if all the data supports a 12-1-2, ultimately the chairperson of the committee has kind of that final say. We want to be collaborative with everyone, and that usually does work 99.99% of the time. But sometimes it's just that all the data supports a 12-1-2, and that integrated co-taught classroom is not appropriate. That might be what is recommended. And then we all work towards making that change. And we've had students move during years or at the end of the next year. I'm gonna go back and forth. So the question really is on if the students down the road a couple of years go, correct me if I'm wrong, and they're making progress and things need to change. If they're not in a general education classroom, are they behind? All of the classrooms go by the same curriculum. So if you were in a general education classroom, an ICT classroom, a special classroom, special ed class, you're all working on the same curriculum. And I'll come back to the 812s in a second. It might just be the pacing of the 812 classroom that we really work towards keeping them going, because students change all the time. It's not an all or nothing. We have students kindergarten, you might be most of your day in an ICT or most of your day in another classroom. As they get older, we have students who spend English and math in a ICT and 2 classes in a special class. The 812s are a little bit different because the students tend to be working towards an alternative assessment, so they're using a different curriculum. So they might start using the ABLES, so it's a little bit harder to then move on to a different setting, but it's happened, and maybe Caroline can speak to it a little bit more.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that to let you know that there's something called an annual review meeting. And that's a Committee on Special Education meeting, and all children who are classified have an annual review meeting once a year in the spring. And so wherever your child starts in kindergarten, that may not be where they are in first grade or second grade or third grade, because every year you meet, look at their progress, and make recommendations for the following year. And our goal is always for students to make as much progress as they can, to not need as much service as they get older. And it really depends upon the nature of the disability in the child. Some children will have lifelong disabilities and will need support all the way through, from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And other children may not. They may be declassified in elementary school or middle school or high school. But our goal is always to provide them with the level of support that they need, not less than that and not more than that. And so every year that could change based on your student and their progress.
Within the district, the question was about special education and sports. So first of all, students who have IEPs can play as they get older, more high school, they can play any sport that they can play. You can try out and play a sport. A lot of you don't know the names, but I'm watching varsity football, varsity this, and I know the students, and they have plans and they're out there playing. For our students who have a lot more physical needs, we are part of the Pioneer League. So it's a league that plays, there's I think 17 other schools. So they play soccer, now they're playing handball, and they're going to play basketball against all the different schools in the area. And this year we're actually very proud. We're hosting the dinner dance for probably 300 student athletes are coming here for a special educational Pioneer League dinner dance. So there's nothing that a student can't participate in. Even if the slide has students who go out of district to another school, they can still play a sport. So the question is, how many students are in an integrated co-taught classroom? So we have, like I said, the classes of 8, the class of 12. Typically, in an integrated co-taught classroom, it could vary. So usually 50% of the students could have IEPs. So we can use a number like if there's 24 total or 26 total, there's usually 12 and 12, give or take. We always have to have more, look to have more students who are gen ed than special education. So if it's, if we only have, we might have 10 gen ed students and 9 special ed students. And we always leave room for growth. So again, it's following in line with the question about the 812 classroom and how we would support a student as if we're thinking they would be improving and getting ready to move out into either an integrated classroom or a 1211. What would that look like?
Yes, I can answer that question. So we have a lot of children who are working on concrete skills. And what's great about the 1212 classroom is it takes a skill that may be able to be mastered by a neurotypical child more easily, and it breaks that skill into a lot of different steps. And then they can work on each step and figure out exactly where the student is struggling to work on it. And by doing that, they can look at what skills they're missing that the child needs to master before they can be in a less restrictive setting. And they really focus on that. That's one piece of it. And the other piece of it is a process that we developed called a less restrictive mainstream trial. And this is a way for somebody from that 812 classroom to go with that child to a larger classroom on a prescribed schedule. So maybe every day during morning meeting for the first week. And then maybe the second week it would be every day during morning meeting and maybe during math. And we can gradually build the child up and see how they're doing in that setting and see what supports they need in that setting. So it's called a mainstream trial, or if it's not a mainstream class, if it's just a less restrictive special ed program, a less restrictive trial. And that would only be done, as a plan with the parent and the principal and the team working together to decide how much time the child spends in that other setting and what supports they need while they're in there, and how it's going to be determined whether or not they're successful in there. And when a child can be successful in there, the CSE will meet to recommend that program. And you'll find, especially as you get older, that some children have strengths in certain areas and more difficulty in other areas. And so you'll see as kids get older, they'll maybe be in one type of program for 1 or 2 subjects and in another type of program for another subject or 2. And that's especially common in the middle school and in the high school, where they may be in an integrated co-teach for, say, science and math, and then they may be in a special class program for social studies and English. So there's a lot of opportunity for flexibility and to really make things work for your child based on their strengths and what they can do and the supports that they need.
And I'm going to come to that question over here. One of the things that you really have to think about, that you live in a great district, and I've shared all the different programs, but we know that there are neighboring districts that don't have the continuum of services that we have. We have options for integrated co-taught classes. It's not required to have an integrated co-taught classroom. It's not required, if you run one, to have a teacher, 2 teachers and an aide there all day. You can, if you talk to your friends who might have children where the special ed teacher is working with 3 classes on the grade level, and they come in for an hour and a half to support students. So we have it all day long. That's the model. We have special class where we have 1211s, some are 1212s. There are a lot of additional one-to-one supports. You've heard about the additional BCBAs that we've added. The staff goes through training in crisis management and de-escalation, because you're seeing more behaviors and social emotional needs throughout the district. So district-wide teachers, clinicians are all going through all those trainings because, as I said earlier, we're responding to the needs of the students. And what we talk about all the time is being proactive, to be proactive to the needs. Mrs. Wordsman, when you started, how many social workers were here in the district? 2 or 3. How many are there now? 8 or 9? Lost track. Same thing. We used to have 1.5 occupational therapists. How many do we have now?
5.
Speech, how many are we up to? 11, isn't it? I think it's 11. Again, to the needs of the students. I've been here for about 20 years. When I started, we talked about out-of-district students. There were close to 90 out-of-district students because we really didn't run any of the programs. It's hard to bring students back, but it's easy not to send them out. So we've built programs, and we got it down into the 30s. With COVID and social emotional needs, it's crept back up, but we've created more of those special classes in the continuum of services. But as was answered, general education is a great place too. There's a lot of supports. 4 reading teachers in each building, AAS teachers. You can get services. You don't need an IEP and a 504 to get support because everyone wants your child to be successful. A lot of you are already in the system for special education. That's why you're here. If in the end your child needs it coming into kindergarten, we will be here to support your child. If they don't, we will still be here, and there'll be other people who will help as well. And if they need something later, great. If we do get services and they need something later, we add on and we have those annual reviews. But it's also something that goes on as we start taking things away because we want the students to be independent, right? You could come into kindergarten and have a one-to-one. At some point, your child's not going off to college with a one-to-one or getting a job with a one-to-one or going into the Army with a one-to-one. So we want to learn to be self-sufficient. They know we talk about it all the time of being the least restrictive environment. Yes, we have special classes, but we always ask if you're making that recommendation, we've had the conversation all the time, why? Why does a child need a special class? Let's look to keep them in the least restrictive environment. And we've added integrated co-taught classes where in 3rd grade now we're up to, I think, 2 in each building for 3rd grade. And I think other grades have more than 1 because of the numbers. We're up to, we service 625 school-age children. It's probably more since last week. Preschoolers, Sabrina, how many?
I think between 3-year-olds and incoming kindergartners, we're at about 110.
Yeah. So a lot of services, a lot of supports, and as you see from Mrs. Sanseverino, a lot of success. There's one more question over here. The question's about the kindergarten screening.
So over the last couple of years, kindergarten screening has kind of shifted in how we've done it. COVID really affected it. But we're starting to get back to the traditional model of kindergarten screening where we invite students to come in. I know that we haven't yet announced what our plan will be for this year, but in speaking with my team, at least at Brookside, we anticipate that it'll be happening at the week or 2 after school ends. So over the summer break, inviting your children to come in. We look at a variety of skills, and it gives us an opportunity to speak with you, hear your concerns. So this is open to children with IEPs, without IEPs. Anyone who's coming to kindergarten is welcome to come in and be screened. And it just gives us an idea to really meet your child and get a feel for them and see where their skill levels are. But children with and without IEPs are included in this screening.
Any other questions? Is there anything that came up that anyone wants to add any information to? Well, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to what you were saying about changing mid-year. Like Michael came in with a one-to-one, and they called me and they said, would you mind if we kind of back off and give him a 2-to-1? He doesn't need that much support. He doesn't need that one-to-one. And I said, definitely. They had the data to prove it. They had observational data, they had anecdotal data, they had data on paper to show that Michael was becoming more independent. So there is that movement. For Michael, that's huge. You know, for some of your kids, maybe it's a movement to a different class period in a 12-1 class. We celebrate every victory, so Michael got a huge party for that. But they mean what they say. They take what your child needs and they run with it. If your child needs it, you can be assured that Yorktown will give it to them. And they'll work with them throughout the year to make sure that they're in the best environment that they can be in.
Thank you. I think the key word is needs. All the things we put together are because students need it. So that sometimes, and you might hear it from any district, any of your friends, anywhere. You know, I went to the meeting, I didn't get what I was looking for. Always think about the fact that we're not here to keep something away from a student if they need it. So if they need it, there's no reason for us not to provide it. But if you come and you think, you know, something is needed, I want it because of whatever reason, that might be a reason why it's not recommended. And maybe it would be recommended some other time when we determine based on data that it's needed. And that's always the piece that happens at the meetings when parents will leave a meeting and say, that was a difficult meeting. And it usually comes down to something that we could probably prove in data that wasn't needed. And a recommendation was made on what a student needs to be successful. And trust me, there's a lot of data being collected, and if it's not going to be enough, all the things that we've added are there to support the students. And we'll keep adding things, and you'll keep hearing about it. I want to thank all of you for coming out. This is one of our best attended nights, and like I said, we've been doing it for about 20 years. One of those first years, I think I was here by myself. And we've added the panel, and thank you everyone for coming out on a Tuesday night and giving up of your time and all of your information. We did record this, so if you want to rewind, pick out something. I wouldn't watch the whole thing again, but if you want to, go for it. But you could certainly go and find a question that you wanted more information on, or if you have friends, we're going to remind all the parents that it will be out there and where they can find it. So if they weren't able to make it tonight, they can watch it. We look forward to seeing you come. We are kind of back into those in-person meetings. If you need a virtual meeting, then you can work with Mrs. Casey to do that. You'll see some different people come to your meetings, especially if your child receives OT, PT, we really want, and speech. We're trying to have a district representative there to talk about and review the evaluations. It's harder to get the preschool providers, so that's what it's hard to schedule everyone because there's 110 kids, probably half of them are coming to kindergarten, so that's a lot of meetings. So we're doing our best to have people cover the meetings and be in person. So thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing your child in kindergarten. Thanks, everybody.